In 2001, Fertitta Enterprises ventured upon a struggling organization that would later revolutionize the world of combat sports. Approached by friend Dana White to buy the company, Lorenzo Fertitta, with the support of older brother Frank, would purchase the promotion and become the savior of the Ultimate Fighting Championship. Holding the position of chairman and CEO of Zuffa, Lorenzo would help carry the UFC to heights few organizations in any sport have reached. And by using his extensive knowledge of business, Lorenzo has expanded the company internationally, positioning to be around for many years to come. He is part of the triumvirate that sits atop the most powerful MMA organization in the world, and is our guest on Fighting Words with Mike Straka. From HDNet, this is Fighting Words with Mike Straka. This week's guest, UFC co-owner Lorenzo Fertitta.
Welcome to Fighting Words. I'm Mike Straka. My guest tonight is the chairman and CEO of the UFC, Lorenzo Fertitta. Lorenzo, thanks for joining.
Absolutely, man.
So let's talk about when you bought UFC in 2001, right?
Right.
Did you have a lot of resistance from the Fertitta family?
You know what? Actually, that's a good story. I did. You know, when we first kind of went to my parents and I said, "Hey, you know, we're gonna buy this thing." My dad, who's obviously from that boxing generation, different generation, the only thing that he had seen is, you know, John McCain making public remarks about the UFC and how controversial it was. So he was like, "Oh my God, you guys can't do that. You know, you're gonna tarnish the family reputation and this and that." And the thing about it is me and Frank, my brother, had never done anything to go against my dad's wishes. You know, very obviously respected him very much. That was the only time we ever did that. We sat him down. We said, "Look, you don't understand. This is what our game plan is. This is what we're going to do, and we're going to turn this thing into a legitimate sport." And really, to his credit, you know, after about a year, he came to some fights, and he started to learn it, started to get it. And then I can remember, I think it was the Tito Ortiz, Forrest Griffin first fight in Anaheim. He looked up, looked around the arena when those guys were walking in, and he turned. He says, "Unbelievable! You guys did what you said you were going to do," and he was very proud from that standpoint.
When you were growing up, were you always expected to go into the family business, go into the casino industry?
You know, I think not necessarily expected. Certainly wasn't pressured, but I mean, that's all I really wanted to do. You know, we had an interesting relationship because it truly was a family business. You know, my dad started what was then called the Bingo Palace. It was 5,000 square feet. Put that in perspective, 5,000 square feet's, I think, about the size of an Outback Steakhouse, maybe even smaller. So 100 slot machines, 4 table games, and we lived this as a family business. So around the dinner table, you know, from the time I was 11, 12, 13, 14, talking about the business, learning about the business, marketing operations. Then, you know, you couldn't work in gaming before you were 21. So before I was 21, I was working in all the non-gaming departments, hotel, food and beverage. Then when I turned 21, worked in the sports book, slots, table games, all those things. And I was so committed. I wanted to start in the business so bad that when I went to the University of San Diego, I would schedule my classes so I got out of school on Thursday afternoon. I'd fly to Vegas, spend the weekend working, and then have my next class on Monday night. And that was the strategy because I wanted to learn as much as I could.
You went to Stern at
Right.
NYU to get an MBA.
I did. I went to NYU, to the Stern School, and spent 2 years there and got my MBA with a concentration in finance.
You dropped your CEO title over at Stations Casino.
Right, I was
in
actually
2008.
the president. I was the president of the station, yep.
In 2008, and you
Correct.
became the chairman and CEO of UFC.
Right.
And Dana White describes that as a very important day for him because it showed everybody that Lorenzo is stepping down here and coming over here because we made this thing, we made it work. Is that how it played out?
Well, I think in some ways, yeah. I mean, look, at the end of the day, the perception in some ways is that, you know, I came over and I wasn't involved. I mean, obviously I was always involved. You know, me and Frank bought the company in 2001. Put Dana there. He obviously ran the company from a day-to-day perspective, but literally me and Dana, I mean, we talked 10, 20, 30 times a day sometimes. You know, very, very involved into the details of the business. And, you know, we just got to the point where me and my brother, being over at Station Casinos, looking at obviously where the future of the UFC was going and seeing that we were all in the same meetings and it wasn't very efficient. So we kind of had the divide and conquer strategies. Like, look, you got to go focus on UFC, I'll focus on Station Casinos. And that's just what we decided to do.
How did you guys meet Dana?
You know, I met Dana, we went to high school together, so met him as a freshman going into Bishop Gorman High School. And, you know, we were friends all the way through until he got kicked out of Gorman. You know, so he wasn't a bad kid. He was just, you know, always seemed to get in trouble. I don't know why. But he went on and went to school back east. Then we both went off to college, and it had been about 6 or 7 years. And as the story goes, we ran into each other at a common friend's wedding. And we just started talking. What are you doing? I don't know, this and that. And at the time, I was on the Nevada State Athletic Commission. He was into boxing. So we kind of hooked up, started training together, and, you know, all of a sudden, we were hanging out every day, too. So,
You guys train jiu-jitsu. Is that how you fell in love with the sport?
yeah, it definitely is. I mean, like everybody else back in the early days, I watched it on pay-per-view, but, you know, and was always intrigued with the ground game, but obviously had no exposure to it. And we ran into John Lewis at the Hard Rock one night. I think we were at some concert. And he said, hey, you guys should come train with me. I'm like, you know what? I'm going to take you up on that. So we scheduled a one-on-one lesson, private lesson. And after the hour and a half, I was just blown away. I'm like, I have to know this. How did I live this long and didn't know this? I mean, how did I literally not know jiu-jitsu? So we started taking it 3 or 4 times a week. That led to us meeting guys like Chuck Liddell and Tito Ortiz and Frank Shamrock before the whole world knew who they were. And then we became kind of junky UFC fans. And Dana fell into the role of managing Chuck and Tito. And, you know, we were just kind of hangers-on. We'd fly to all these little podunk towns or whatever, go to the fights and have a great time. And it was fun.
Is it true that in the bylaws of the UFC that if you guys have a real dispute, you have to jiu-jitsu it out and play?
Absolutely true. It's in the document, you know, because me and my brother are 50-50 partners on everything we do. I mean, that's just the way it goes, obviously. And when we started drafting the partnership agreement, shareholder agreement, the lawyers came to me and said, well, what if you and Frank can't agree? I'm like, well, we always agree. We'll figure it out. You know, we're brothers, whatever. They go, no, kind of legally, we have to have some resolution, dispute resolution in there. So we kind of came up with this concept, thought it would be funny, but it's true. 3 5-minute rounds, sport jiu-jitsu, Dana's a referee, but we use the point system.
More with Lorenzo Fertitta. Don't go anywhere.
Coming up next on Fighting Words with Mike Straka.
There was a time you made a call to Dana, you wanted to sell.
It just got to the point where the losses just kept coming. And quite honestly, at that time, there was no light at the end of the tunnel.
That's coming up next on Fighting Words with Mike Straka. Welcome back to Fighting Words with Mike Straka. This week's guest, co-owner of the UFC, Lorenzo Fertitta.
Welcome back to Fighting Words. My guest tonight is Lorenzo Fertitta, the CEO and chairman of the UFC. Is that weird? Does that sound weird to you?
No, not really.
You believe in this sport?
Oh gosh, man, this is my life. I believe in it. You know, look, I usually don't do a lot of press. In fact, I don't do a lot of press at all. Just kind of have a different role in what we do. And obviously Dana's the best that there is at doing press and being their promoter. But no, I don't think that, it doesn't feel weird, you know, chairman and CEO of the UFC. I mean, I'm proud of it. It's an awesome sport. It's a dream.
There was a time, very well documented, when you made a call to Dana and said, find out what you can get. You wanted to sell the company. At the time, you were $40 million in the red, I think.
Right.
As the story goes.
Actually, at that time, we were about $30 million in the red. And it just got to the point where the losses just kept coming. And I could see that my brother was getting a little bit of angst, you know, like, when is this going to end? When is this thing going to turn? And quite honestly, at that time, there was no light at the end of the tunnel. We didn't know. It was just literally a black hole. We were throwing money at it. So I finally called up Dana. I said, look, this is getting ridiculous. You got to figure out what we do. Go call a few people, see what we can come up for the company. And he came back like the next day and put a figure on the table. And I said, you know, let me go home and think about it before you call the guy back. I'm going to get a good night's sleep and really think this through. And I literally woke up the next day, maybe at 5 o'clock in the morning. I felt great, and I'm like, you know what? I called him right then, 6 o'clock on the way into the gym. I go, I'm not ready to tap out. We can figure this thing out. We got to figure this thing out. We've never failed in anything. We're not going to fail now. Let's make this work. And that's kind of how it went down.
And did Frank agree with you?
Yeah, I mean, look, he did agree with the philosophy that we hadn't lost at anything. We weren't quitters. And we had to figure out a way to make this work. So he was definitely in agreement with that.
What was the turning point? Like, when did you look around, like you said, your father looked around in Anaheim and said, this thing really turned out. But when did you know, okay, we're going to be okay?
You know, it goes back to what we always say, is that great moment when Forrest and Stefan had that great fight. And it was just a feeling that it just felt like such a big thing. I was confident in the product. It was the first time we ever did a live fight on TV. And I always felt like that if we did a live fight, it would break through, people would dig it, they would get it, and that would build our business. And lo and behold, boom, we did that fight. A week later, we did Randy Chuck 2, and the numbers were great.
Now, the Ultimate Fighter TV show was self-financed. You guys had to pay for it, and was it a time buy where you had to pay for the actual airtime as well on Spike?
It wasn't a time buy. Basically, the way that the deal worked was it was sort of a barter type deal where we went and we paid for the whole production entirely. They gave us the time, and then we retained, I don't know, I think 60 seconds or a few commercials within the inventory that theoretically we were supposed to go sell to sponsors to help cover the cost of the production that we paid for. Now, if you go back and look at the original, the DVD to UFC Ultimate Fighter 1, Tough 1, you'll see that the mat is completely blank. There's not a sponsor in the entire gym, not a sponsor on the mat. It's the only time in the UFC you've never seen a sponsor. Now, obviously, when you watch the Ultimate Fighter, it's Burger King and Miller Lite and Zions and Amped and all these different sponsors. It's a whole different story. But back then, nobody wanted to put up money for it.
There was a time, I remember, I can't remember the press conference, but we were all badgering Dana about sponsors, and he said something to the effect of, look, if Coke, we don't need Coke. Coke, if they want 18 to 34-year-olds, they got to come to us.
Right.
And eventually you got the Bud Light, and you got Harley Davidson, and all the big companies that are now coming in. When did you look at Dana and say, good job, man, I mean, this is a great deal?
Well, I mean, certainly, I mean, he was 100% right. You know, we built this thing ourselves. Nobody helped us. You know what I mean? We just did it literally on our backs.
They were trying not to succeed.
But I think one of the watershed moments for us was when, you know, obviously Bud Light came in. That was like, you know what, we have some sponsors, but when Bud Light comes in, that's when you know, we're here, we've arrived. And that's going to be that watershed moment where other guys are going to say, hey, look, Bud Light's in this thing. They're smart guys. They do the research. They must know something we don't know, so we got to take a look at it. And that's exactly what happened. Now we got blue chip sponsors everywhere.
Why are the sports guys not behind you guys and the entertainment guys are?
Well, you know what? I wish I had an answer to that. I mean, believe me, we have been up and down the street talking to these networks for the last 10 years, meeting with the sports guys on multiple occasions. And to this day, no sports, I mean, they've been on a network, but you're right, it's not coming through the sports division. I don't know if it's just that you have a generational thing. I mean, because there's certainly fans within the sports organizations, maybe the younger guys coming up at the ESPNs, the CBS, the NBCs, that they get it, they want to be involved, but whoever is ultimately the decision maker so far has said, they don't want it. So,
first of all, are you guys still pursuing a network deal?
Yeah, I mean, certainly we'd be interested in being on network, but so far to date, it hasn't made sense for us. We're not just going to do it to do it. Obviously, our business is going fine without it. We don't need it, but if a scenario comes together where we think it makes sense, we'll do it. But so far, it doesn't work.
How many verticals are there in the business? Obviously, there's a television product,
Right.
There's the merchandising, and then there's the live events.
Right.
What's the most important?
Well, it depends, the way you look at it. I mean, I will tell you that hands down, the most important thing for our company, and literally kind of the mantra of how we run this thing, is that all the verticals, everything we do points to one thing, and there has to be a tie back to pay-per-view. Everything we do, and we tell all of our team members, everything you do every day, you should be doing something to try to sell more pay-per-view. So if you're obviously in PR, you're trying to sell more pay-per-view. If you're in merchandise and licensing, you're working with companies and distributors to make sure that when our product's on the shelf, that we're having a presence and there's something there to tell people when the next pay-per-view is. Literally every single thing you do. If you're selling a t-shirt at Target or at, Pacific Sun, that the tag should point people to go to UFC.com and say, when's the next pay-per-view? So everything is this big concentric wheel that points back to pay-per-view.
You guys lost a lot of money in 2007 or maybe 2008 when you went to London for the first time, and you spent a lot of money marketing it. Did you think you spent too much money on it? And how did you feel about that?
I know we spent too much money on it. This is where we missed in that market, is that we underestimated how popular we already were. You know what I mean? So we weren't really on TV for a long time there. We felt like we had to go in there and spend a lot of money to create awareness so people knew what it was and they wanted to check it out. What we found was people already knew us, even though we weren't on TV. I mean, with the internet and social networking and all these different things, people know the UFC, even though we're not on every network in China, we're not yet in India, we're not yet in a lot of these new territories, they know who we are. So what we learned is forget about those big marketing campaigns. It's kind of a waste of money, and You know, we obviously want to try to run this thing to where it makes sense.
You guys hired Mark Fisher from the NBA. He ran the Asia division out there and turned it into a $10 billion Asia operation. What are your expectations for Asia?
We have high expectations for Asia. Mark's been on the ground now for about 3 months with us, and he's already made a tremendous impact. The thing that we do understand is that Asia, and particularly China, is going to be a long-term play. I can't sit here today and tell you how, if, when, or how much, how we're ever going to monetize China. I don't know. All I know is I feel like we need to be there, and we'll figure it out after the fact. I think a lot of companies are doing that. You know, China's kind of an enigma. We're enthralled with it because it's so big and it's got so much potential, but it's not the immediacy of saying, I know this is how we're going to go in there and generate revenue.
Hold that thought, Lorenzo. When we come back, we're going to talk about Flash Entertainment and a 10% sale of the UFC.
Coming up next on Fighting Words with Mike Straka.
How important are the fighters to your business?
After I spent time on the commission, really got to see behind the scenes how fighters were treated. I'm like, you know what? We're going to totally break the mold.
That's coming up next on Fighting Words with Mike Straka. Welcome back to Fighting Words with Mike Straka. This week's guest, UFC Chairman and CEO Lorenzo Fertitta.
Welcome back to Fighting Words. I'm Mike Straka. My guest is Lorenzo Fertitta. We talked a little bit about the 10% sale in Abu Dhabi. How did that come about?
You know, at the end of the day, I met Sheikh Taknoon and his brothers, part of the royal family. They're all big UFC fans. They're all practitioners of jiu-jitsu. In fact, they've sponsored the World Championships with the Abu Dhabi Combat Club, very prestigious jiu-jitsu tournament that everybody goes to and wants to win. And really had a friendship. They wanted to bring some big events to Abu Dhabi, and they had the F1 track, Yas Island, which is a big deal, and they've done concerts, and they wanted a UFC there for the region. So we said, yeah, we'll do that. And then one thing led to another. And, you know, they have this arm, Flash Entertainment, which is their entertainment arm of kind of their sovereign wealth fund. And they looked for different investments and things like that. And they learned about what we were doing, the growth, the international expansion, and they said that they'd love to invest in us. Now, I'd literally been approached by every single private equity group in the world.
Really?
All the big guys, all the big funds, all these other,
BlackRock.
all of them. And they all wanted to have a part of the UFC. And I'm like, well, we would never do that because we don't need the capital. There's no reason to do it. If I was ever going to do anything, it was going to be with a strategic investor, somebody I felt could help grow our business. So we started thinking about Flash, and we said, wow, these guys know a lot of people around the world. I mean, they have 7% of the world's oil reserves, sell oil, you know, all over Asia and these different places. I don't know anybody in India. I don't know anybody in China. I don't know anybody in a lot of these different countries. Maybe aligning ourselves with them would be smart. And I can tell you so far, I mean, it's opened doors like you can't even believe. I mean, close to getting a deal in India, and all these countries are now opening up.
Reed Harris, the guy who used to run the WEC, said to me, when you guys bought the WEC and brought him aboard, first thing you said to him was, take care of the fighters. How important are the fighters to your business? Obviously, we know as fans how important they are, but...
Right. It's not even just about the business. You know, I think it maybe just comes from me always being a fight fan and growing up here in Las Vegas, and, you know, we had no professional sports teams. You know, my dad couldn't take me to the Cowboys game or to the, you know, a Mavericks game or whatever. It was about, the only thing here is boxing, so we went to all the fights, and and after I spent time on the commission, really got to see behind the scenes how fighters were treated, how promoters treated fighters, how managers treated fighters. I'm like, you know what, we're going to totally break the mold and change the way things are. And you know what, look, you're not going to make everybody happy all the time, but we do our best to make sure the fighters are taken care of.
Who's your favorite fighter?
You know, I get asked that all the time, and I don't have a favorite fighter. You know I can't answer that question anyways.
How about this?
I like guys who come to fight. I'll put it that way. I like guys who come in. I don't care if they win or lose. Come and fight.
What fighter do you think you most resemble?
Wow, I most resemble. In what sense? I mean, that's kind of a broad question. I mean,
character, fight, heart.
You know, I've always liked, and everybody knows it, but I've always liked the way Chuck, you know, is as a person. You know, he's very humble. He's kind of quiet, but at the same time, a lot of people may not know this, but he's got a great sense of humor. He's always joking around. But he's a badass dude, man. When he comes in, he's not coming in to win a decision. He's not coming in to eke it out. He's coming in to knock you out in any way he can. And, you know, those are traits that certainly I think I really like. And I guess that's what I would want to be, is a guy like Chuck.
Obviously, you're around the best athletes in the world in your career and your job. But your son, Nico, is a great football player, is on the U.S. Army team.
You know, Nico, he's in 8th grade. He got named to this All-American team, top 40 kids in the country. Is he one of the top 40 kids? I don't know, but they certainly liked him. They went through like 8,000 different tapes, culled it all down, and his highlight film, which is on YouTube, is because Dana tweeted it out. It's been viewed by a lot of people, but he's a bad little dude, man.
He's
he can play some football.
Does he train MMA, Nico?
He started boxing now. He hasn't started MMA, but he started boxing, and right now all he cares about is lifting weights and trying to get bigger for high school. So,
would you support an MMA career if he chose?
Yeah, why not? I don't have a problem with it. Obviously, I would. I'd rather him focus on college, but if he wants to fight, that's fine.
I know Dana's been saying this for years, that UFC will be bigger than the NFL.
Yeah.
Will it be bigger than boxing, where you'll see a guy like, Vitor Belfort versus Anderson Silva making $30 million for a fight?
I hope so. I really do. I certainly do. The difference is our model is different. It's totally different. I mean, nobody in boxing can put together a card like we put together. They put one fight on there, and they have 1 or 2 fights a year, and they do massive pay-per-view numbers because the amount of product or supply has gone down. And clearly, there's still demand. So yeah, the guys like Manny and Floyd, they can demand these monster numbers because without them, I mean, there's no fight, right? We spread the money around a lot more guys, and in boxing, the guys on the undercard will be making $1,000, $1,500. Our guys, yeah, people say, oh, they're making 5 and 5. Believe me, they walk out of here, they get bonus. They all make a lot more money than boxers do on the undercard.
Are you a fan of boxing still?
I am. I am a fan of boxing. It's kind of tough though. I mean, if I have the choice, like the other night, there's MMA on and boxing, and I'm gonna watch MMA. I mean, because I'm still a fan of boxing, but I'm frustrated with it at so many levels. So many levels.
Are there any fight leagues or entertainment leagues that you guys took lessons from? I mean, a lot of people say you have the same model as WWE.
Absolutely, yeah.
A lot of people say, okay, poker had sort of the same kind of trajectory, NASCAR had the same trajectory. Have you learned and taken lessons from other sports leagues?
Absolutely. I mean, look, nobody has an original idea, really. At the end of the day, you're taking little things from all these different areas to try to come up with ideas to make your business better. You have, we looked at NASCAR, with how they ran their business and how fan-friendly they were and really tried to please the fan and create an experience for them. You have WWE, which our model is very similar from a business standpoint, the way pay-per-view works, how they do everything to do TV.
Yep.
Everything you do bounces you to pay-per-view, what I was talking about earlier, same type of idea. And honestly, I don't want this to come out the wrong way, but we looked at boxing and just figured don't do anything boxing did, because they literally have screwed up a sport and an industry that over the last 100 years has generated billions and billions of dollars. And to this day, there's no entity that there's any value in. It's not like football where the NFL, you have that brand, there's value in the brand. Same thing with NBA or any other sport. Boxing, there's a zero brand. How that's possible, I have no idea.
The brand of the UFC, is it bigger than any one fighter?
I think so. I think the brand is, not to take anything away from the fighters, but look, at the end of the day, the UFC has to go on forever. It's going to live forever, right? Fighters are going to come, they're going to participate, then they're going to live with that brand, and they're going to benefit from that brand from the rest of their lives. So other than boxing, where, yeah, you get a guy who's in the limelight, for 2 or 3 years, and all of a sudden he fades away. Nobody knows where he is or what he's doing. What's Roberto Duran doing? I have no idea.
Right.
But guys that are in the UFC are always going to be associated with the UFC and be able to monetize that and whatever they do, whether they open their own gym or they're promoting themselves, or they're getting royalties on the action figures that we have, or T-shirts that we create, or things like that. So really trying to build this model and get real value for them for the rest of their life.
Last question: if you could change anything about the UFC, or if you had one thing on a wish list, I wish it was this, I wish we could do this, what would that be?
We would have loved to put some of these other fights on, like Fedor against Couture, or Fedor against Lesnar, stuff like that. I mean, we really do try to put fights on that fans want to see. And it bothers me that we haven't been able to do that. It's not for lack of trying. Believe me, we sat down with those guys on a number of occasions to try to get that done. So that bothers me a bit, because we want to be able to put these legendary fights on, that people will talk about for years and years and years. And, going in 10 or 20 years from now, if you look back and say, I wish that fight would have happened. We never want to have that, and people say, what's your dream fight right now? We want to make GSP and Silva. I mean, assuming that it all makes sense at the right time and everything. But people say, are you against that? No, we want to make big fights. We're fight fans. We're like everybody else in the arena. We want to see what they want to see.
Lorenzo, thank you so much for doing the show. I really appreciate it. This has been Fighting Words. I'm Mike Straka. Until next week, enjoy the fights.